Welcome to Health Well for Us. This is Sveta, and in this video, I wanted to show you the steps I take when I make my sourdough bread. I have been making this bread for over a year, and these are just the steps that I take. I have found that through my journey in making sourdough, I have learned a lot. And some of these things you really have to learn through experience. So if this is your first time making sourdough bread, just know that in the end, no matter if it rose correctly or if it didn't or if it's flat, it still will taste great. The ingredients are still the same. So with this bread, grace and patience, and just keep trying different recipes if you like to do that. So I hope this video will help you to understand what are some of the steps in making sourdough bread, and that as complicated as it seems, is just simple, repetitive kind of movements. And yes, it takes time. You have to wait and let it rise. But the end result is so worth it. And this is the only bread that I eat these days. So anyway, let's go ahead and jump into the steps. And if you guys have any questions or comments, please leave them in the comments below and I will definitely respond. The first step is to build levain or leaven. And I'm using my starter from the night before that's just been sitting, and it's nice and bubbly and ready to go. And I'm going to go ahead and get 25 grams of the starter in a new jar. And I'm going to add 50 grams of filtered water. I like using filtered water because I do use organic ingredients. I try to make sure my end result is as clean as possible. And then I need to go ahead and add 50 grams of my flour mixture. And I have my flour mixture recipe in a different step. And I will link that video below in case you haven't seen it. But it's not just regular bread flour. It does have rye flour in it as a mixture. So I use 25% starter and I use 25 grams starter, 50 grams water, and 50 grams flour. I need to mix them all together. I want to make sure they're nice and mixed in. You want to make sure also you have no dry parts left. So it takes just about a minute. I put a rubber band just to see where I start, and that way I can tell if it's rising really well. That is my recipe for making my sourdough bread. And today I'm using the Acorn whole wheat flour. I do find this flour works better in the winter. It does leave a more moist crust or crumb. And so I sometimes will use just a regular whole wheat flour instead. I like this one because it's easy to digest. In the bowl, I have 394 grams filtered water, and I'm adding 100 grams of whole wheat flour. Next, I'm going to go ahead and measure out my bread flour. And then I need 395 grams of just regular bread flour. And yes, I do use organic. I feel like the end result is a little bit better. I add the bread flour to the rest of the mixture, which has the water and then the whole wheat flour. And then I go ahead and mix them all really well together. This is called autolyse. This step just allows you to prep the flour and the water so that when you do add your leaven, it will all blend in well together. You could skip this step, but usually I don't because I like how the dough looks at the end. So this is my dough, and I'm going to go ahead and cover it with a disposable shower cap because I just feel like it fits the bowls really well. And then you let it rest for 1 to 3 hours. When the leaven is ready, I will go ahead and add the leaven to my mixture, my autolyse. So I need to go ahead and measure out the leaven. And I want to add 100 grams. So I use like a little bowl and I just portion it out and make sure I have 100. But because I've done this so many times, I know exactly how much leaven is left behind. And so I actually don't even measure it anymore. I know that I just have just enough leaven remaining just to make my starter again. And so this step, once you have practice, you can possibly skip and just go straight from the leaven into the bowl. And so that's what 100 grams looks like. I need to use a spatula, like my silicone spatula, and I just gently spread it about, because then I'm going to be using my wet fingers and be kind of pressing it into the dough, into the outerlies that I created. And so by using wet fingers, the dough is not going to stick to your fingers. And so it's very important that you have clean hands and that you use water before you push it all in. And as you can see, it's very soft, the dough already, because I let it sit for about 2 hours. And so I'm going to go ahead and then just like gently fold everything together before I start to knead this mixture. And it's not super sticky, and it comes together really well. The kneading part, you can take 3 minutes, you can take 5 minutes. It's up to you. But honestly, my hand gets really tired. And I can tell like when it's mixed in, just by feel. And it gets actually really, really sticky once like the leaven is included in. And so then I just use my fingers and I just knead for a few minutes. And I kind of just do, as you can see, it's just pulling and pressing. And then I will like flip the dough over and then just keep this kind of process over and over. And so as you can see, it's much more mixed in and it's getting a little bit stickier and harder to work with. Then I'm going to go rinse my fingers. And this is a tip, that you use a bowl of cold water and you rinse your fingers in there first. I found that if I go straight to the sink, I get balls of dough all over my sink and I just don't feel like it's good for the drain. So I need to then let it rest for 30 minutes and I use the same shower cap. And when it's done or while it's resting, I need to add 10.5 grams of sea salt. And I like using the Celtic sea salt. It's very finely milled. So then once I have enough, I will just spread it about evenly. Some people like to add a little bit of salt at a time and then mix it in and add some more. So it's up to you what you prefer. Because this bread already has so many steps, I try to cut down how many steps I take. And I find that the salt mixes in fine just using one step. And so I just kind of push the salt in. And as you can see, it's like dimpling. And then I just kind of squeeze it together. And by this time, the dough is feeling really soft and pliable. And you can tell that everything is coming together really nicely. And then once I feel like the salt is pretty well in, I go ahead and start to pull in the edges. And then I will knead the dough like before. And it's really just pulling and tucking. And you can just go from side into the middle and just keep repeating like this kind of step. But I do like to knead it where I can really feel the dough in my fingers. And you will feel the salt for a little bit and then until it starts to incorporate. And then you're done. So really, this is just about feel. How does the dough feel in your hands? Can you feel the salt? It's a matter of experience. And the more you make this bread, the better handle you'll have on what you like it to feel like. So at this point, it's ready to rest again. So I'm going to go ahead and cover it and let it rest for another 30 minutes. And I usually make 2 at a time, so that's why you see another bowl. And so then I wet my fingers and I go around the bowl and just gently pick up the edges, because I need to do just little stretch and folds where I take the edge of the dough and I pull it. And that helps to build strength in the dough, so your final product will be nice and strong. And so I go around and I just keep pulling and pressing into the middle. And I do this until I feel like the dough doesn't have as much give anymore. As you can see, I can pull up quite a bit still. And so I just keep going around and around until I feel like I have a nice little ball. And then I will flip it over and then let it rest for another 30 minutes. And as you can see, just a lot of the steps are very repetitive and there's a lot of rest time. So you have to make sure you pick a day when you have time to be at home. So now it's rested another 30 minutes. Then I'm going to do my second stretch and fold. And as before, you're going to go around the bowl and you're going to loosen the edges. And as you can tell, the dough is getting much softer. It's getting much more pliable. And look at the strength of it. Like I can really pull it up and it does not break. So I can tell that it's developing really nicely and that I'm going to really like my end result. And so I'm just going around and around and really just pulling. The pulling really helps to build strength in the dough and you just don't want it to break. So you just pull enough and then put it into the middle. And I showed this step again and again because I feel like with these kinds of recipes, it's in the steps, it's in the little moments. And so I'm just about done. I did all the sides. And once I feel like my dough has a nice little ball, then I will again pick it up and flip it over and let it rest for another 30 minutes. And it's very soft at this point. I will repeat this one more time. And so again, I'm going to use clean hands and I'm going to go around the edges. And I will do as the first two steps is I'm really just going to pull and like stretch and fold. And as you can tell, like how the dough is, it's even more pliable. It's even stronger at this point. And you can actually get away with just doing a couple of the stretch and folds. But because I like to give my dough plenty of time, I will go ahead and do the 3 of them. So now after about 30 minutes of resting, I'm going to use a different dish and I'm going to add olive oil to the bottom of it, just a splash. And that helps to keep the dough from sticking in the dish. And you will see later how that works. So before I put it into my next dish, I'm going to go ahead and do the same step where I wet my fingers. And then I go around the edges and I loosen it. And as you can see, it's really like starting to rise and like really much more stronger now. And as you can see, it's actually getting some volume as well. And so maybe in the summertime I will, and also you need to pop any big bubbles that you see. But in the summertime, I'll probably cut down to use 2 stretch and folds because I did feel like it was processing really quick and I might not need that 3rd one that I use in the wintertime because it rises a lot slower. And so then I'm going to go ahead and transfer this big bulk of dough. And this bowl is a little small for me. But because this is all I have, I just use what I have. So if you do have a bigger dish, do use that. And I use the same shower cap and I let it rest for about an hour. I'm really waiting for the edges to like the edges of the dough to meet the edges of the dish. And so then in this is a coil fold. So I wet both of my hands or both of my fingers and I do coil folds. This will be like a 3-time kind of process as well. So as you can see, I pull on the edges and then I tuck it under and then I turn the bowl around and I do that with every single edge. And I really just pull the dough up and then just kind of tuck it under. And this again is still helping the dough to build strength. So then I'm going to cover it up and it's going to rest for about another 45 or an hour. It depends. I'm really looking to see how the dough is spreading out. So once I feel like, so I will do a couple of these coil folds. And then once I feel like my dough has risen enough, I will go ahead and start to prepare to put into its little baskets. So in this step, I'm just using some bread flour and I'm flouring the top because next I'm going to be flipping it over. And as you can see, the olive oil really helps it to come out of the dish easily. And then I'm going to go ahead start and shape my bread. This is a pretty soft like dough. And so I need to use enough flour so it's not sticking to my fingers or to the counter. So I then take just some flour around the edges and I really just tuck it in. And that really helps when I'm shaping the dough that it doesn't stick in odd places. And this step, you just have to be kind of careful. You don't want any extra flour, so whatever's extra, just kind of push it away because you can use that later if you have another loaf that you're working on. So then I use my little tool and to help pick up the dough. It's nice and sticky at this point, and it's a wet dough. It's definitely a high hydration dough. So then I go ahead and flip over the other side. I make sure the edges are pushed down, and if there are any big bubbles, please pop them because you don't want that to be in your final bread. It'll create really big pockets of air. So then I pull it out and I tuck it in, and as you can see, then I just roll it, and it's really nice and soft and puffy at this point. And I try not to press too hard because I don't want to let all that rise out of it. And then because I'm all the way in the middle of my counter, I'm going to go ahead and just scoot it closer to me because I do need to go ahead and pull the edges together like that, where you take the bottom and the top and then you press them together. And that just creates a loaf that looks like a better shape, I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. I'm just squeezing them together. And as you can tell, I'm running out of my flour and it's starting to stick to my fingers. But it's because of the kind of whole wheat flour I'm using. It creates more of a wet dough. So if this dough is too wet, you can use less water initially, or you can just use a regular whole wheat flour. So these are my Benetton baskets. I already have them pre-seasoned, and I just spray them with water, and I use rice flour, and I just swirl the rice flour around, and it creates a non-stick barrier. So then when I put my dough in, I go ahead and kind of shape it a little bit by pulling and tucking. And that just helps the final product to look more even. I use the covers that these baskets come with to cover it. I know some people put it under the bread, but because I like to see the ridges on my final product, I just use this as my cover. So this has been in the fridge for more than 24 hours. And I love the ridges that this creates in this basket. And I use a normal razor and I just cut through. And in this case, as you can tell, I let it sit in the fridge for a little bit too long. And I kind of forgot, but it still ends up looking beautiful. And so this is the final product. I let it rest overnight before I cut it. And as you can see, it's an even crumb and it's super moist and delicious. Thank you for watching, and I hope this recipe is a success for you. Until next time, this is Sveta. Bye.